Hey Matt, hey, you
Hey,
got a
what's
minute?
up? Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
What if?
I've got I've been doing some work on micro front ends that I wanted to show you.
Yeah, that sounds cool. So, micro front ends, I've had a couple of customers talk to me about them. I haven't really used them too much, but micro front ends, if I remember, it's kind of like the concept of microservices in the back end, right? Like, so you've got many different teams, and they own and build a separate independent service. Micro front ends, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's like the same content, but when you've got a very large website where many different teams make pieces of the website, they can basically work on their pieces independently, individually, and still have it contained within the larger app and not have any package dependencies, etc. Kind of conflict between all these little mini apps that are embedded in this big app. Is that like the right way to kind of think about it?
Yeah, that's pretty spot
Yep.
on. Like it's basically isolating components from a much larger monolithic application
Mm-hmm.
into independent delivery, and so that teams can work on one module without affecting another team. And
Yep.
yeah, one of the biggest issues that we do have found is there's so many different ways of doing the micro front ends into the monolithic app. And yeah,
Yep.
one of the biggest problems is kind of the interdependency on modules or interdependency on libraries. I've been working on a couple of ways of removing some of the interdependency, or also being able to package things up so that we can provide different libraries, like a React app with an Angular app with a Vue app, and
Mm-hmm.
all display it through the one monolith. So
Okay.
I'd be keen to show you what I've done. I've done a little proof of concept for you just to show you the code really simple.
Yeah. Yep. I'm just looking at your screen. I think you've got an app controller up now.
Yeah, so this one here, this is my isolated module that basically, for the simplicity of showing you that the proof of concept, all I want to do at this stage is just write controller app onto my page. But
Mm-hmm.
you could consider this my whole micro app that's a small component of a much larger group of microservice apps or micro apps. So basically, I want to be able to run it in isolation to another app. So it still follows the same process as React. I've chosen React as for the
Yep.
demo here. So you still got your HTML page, you've still got your element that you use to write the virtual DOM into, um, and then so
And then
basically
it's
like
also got its own separate dependencies there as well, doesn't it? Like looking at it. So
yeah,
you've got
yeah. So
yeah.
it's this has got a dependency on React,
Mm-hmm.
standard React 17 library, um, and then or it's the latest React, the latest long term support React library. Um, it's just writing the app controller, to the page, and like any standard React app would do. And
Yep.
basically, if I run this, I have it running on port 3001.
Yep.
I can let's pull this up. I can show you.
So because
Let's
of the dependencies are different as well, right? Like that means that you said you're using React 18 here. It means that you could theoretically in the app that you might embed this into, you could be running like React 16 on that, or just a different
so
version of React, right?
other way
Yep.
around, yeah. Like this app's using React 17. The
Okay.
one that I'm going to show you, so the actual the monolithic app that I'm going to show you will be running React 18 release
Okay.
candidate.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's yeah,
Cool.
two different versions of React.
Because that's always the problem that I had, right? Like I want to use particular dependencies, and that those dependencies aren't supported inside the app that I'm trying to embed into, right? So you end up
Yeah,
having everyone has to usually without micro front ends and a design like this, everyone usually has to kind of play ball on the version that everyone sits in, and it kind of does uh, kind of limit the speed that you can move as an individual team.
yeah,
Yep.
yes, absolutely. This will help the velocity or the speed of the team being able to develop their individual app in isolation and not have to, if somebody says, "Oh, we're upgrading everything to the same version," then they have to,
Yep.
hurry and do an upgrade. This allows them to continue their development in isolation.
Yep.
Um,
Or wait
so, so
one
like
year for a new feature as well, right?
that's
Yeah.
right. So you can see like this is pretty normal. It's a pretty standard React app. It's a little bit of a different structure here in terms of index and bootstrap.
Hmm.
Like because normally you'd see index and then your app.js. That's just to help me with my module federation. So what I mean by that is I'm actually using Webpack to do the actual federation. So the same way that we do when we chunk files, like developing a single page application, we'll chunk multiple files out so that we only load them when they're needed, as opposed to loading everything at once. And we're doing a
Yep.
very similar thing here with the with the Webpack 5's module federation plugin. So what we can actually do is we can tell it to expose some of the classes. Now, I'm using a React class here, but this could just as easily be Angular and pointing to an Angular source or a view source, or even like vanilla JavaScript that you've written yourself and you want to expose it as a remote or a federated module. So in this case, I'm calling them remote modules because I'm going to be hosting this React app on my port 3001, as you saw, and I'm going to create my other app to then pull it in from that remote location. So it's talking on different ports. But all I'm really doing here is I'm giving it a name. So remote.js is the name that my other app is going to expect to see as the remote JavaScript file. And then I'm also exposing the actual class. The reason I'm doing this is so that when it gets minified, it creates a string, a strongly named string, so that I can actually query on App Controller, as opposed to the minified version of our code that changes all of the class names down to individual characters. So this way we can expose a string, which represents the whole group of JavaScript module that it's going to import. And that's it. Like, that's all I've had to do, really. That's different to a normal Webpack build for a React app. So let me jump over to my other app. So this is the one that's going to call it. And I'll show you exactly what I'm doing before I jump into my code. I'm actually calling... So instead of exposing, now I'm saying I'm expecting a remote module. So I'm calling a module from a remote location. I'm putting it in the controller container, and I'm giving it a URL. So I'm actually using external template remotes plugin to allow me to create a remote location as a variable, and then feed it in to Webpack during the build. So that actually is part of why I'm doing this Bootstrap, is because this index file actually has that. So window.controller URL, and I'll show you the libs URL soon. So we exposed our controller app on port 3001, and there it is. So in my Webpack, it's going to expect to see a controller container that has that URL /remotes.js. So it'll load from that file any classes in the same way that it would read in any other JavaScript. I'll jump back onto libraries soon, but first I want to show you exactly what I'm doing. So you did see how I'm exposing the URL, the remote URL. So we could actually append this with variables, so that if we had different versions of the same controller or the same app, that we might want to call a specific version under a folder. But at this stage, I'm just calling the root location for that app. If we go into Bootstrap, all Bootstrap is doing is this is your traditional index.js. So this is all it's doing is creating your virtual DOM element, and it's just basically calling the libraries that you want to use. I'll jump back to this with the libs soon. What I want to show you is I'm using the React lazy and suspend. So I can actually use the lazy loading to then say I want to actually read in, or I want to query in my app controller that's in my other remote app, using lazy loading to import from that controller container the app controller class. So basically, this will do some asynchronous loading now, so lazy loading, as opposed to the synchronous loading when we actually import directly from import on build.
And that way, if you've got any delays or latency, like it's not going to just show up with an error. Like, it's going to expect that. Yeah. That's cool.
So using lazy in conjunction with suspend, I can actually tell suspense that if something's failing or falling, then use a fallback. So I'm just putting text in here, but this could be a logical block. So you could be doing some sort of function to do a test, or to do a load on something else, or to trigger something. But essentially, I just want to show in this case it's a simple POC. So it's just going to say loading, and then once it's actually load the controller or the class, it will render it to the DOM in the React DOM render lifecycle.
This actually reminds me of like the story that I hear at Amazon about the add to cart button or something like that. So we used to have problems way back in Amazon.com when a particular section of the site would go down, and the page would be unavailable. Customers couldn't buy something. And effectively having this method with the fallback's quite clever, because it means that like you won't have just, like the app won't work for people. It just means that particular function might not be
Yeah,
available until it's up and
exactly.
running again. Yeah, it's really
You
cool.
know what? You could even expose an entire, like a local controller. So you might have your remote controller, but then you say, you know what, I want to go back to an old iframe with a 4 minute. So you might
Yeah, yeah.
expose that and have that as your fallback.
Yep. Nice.
So that's this is running on 3000 and that's on port
It
3000.
is
So
on
let's
3000. Yeah, yeah.
let's load that. Oop, I clicked it twice. So that'll load, and there you go. Let me just reload that and see if we can see the. You might see loading very quickly before. Yeah, there you go. So it says loading very quickly,
Yep.
but that was pretty quick, right? So the actual initial load time had more to do with my environment than actually loading the remote app. Because
Yep.
if it was trying to load the remote app, it would be saying loading. So it's not an issue with the time that the app was, the whole thing was loading. All right, so this is my main app calling my remote app. So you can see this is my main app calling my remote, and then we're using the app controller, which was the same controller app. So it's now
Yep.
loading that micro front end or the micro app or the federated module in this case into that same app. Now, the one last thing that I wanted to show you is what I said I'd come back to is I'm also exposing.
Was
So
it
let's go back
that
to our app pack.
libs? Yeah.
Yeah, so you can see that I've got a remote libs, and I'm just calling libs.remote libs. What I'm actually doing there is instead of adding the React library to that project, I've actually created another project, which all it's going to do is you can see in the index.js, there is nothing there. It's an empty project. All it's got is essentially the package.json, and you can see under my dependencies, I got my React and my React DOM library. I've specified that I actually want to use, library 18, the release candidate for library 18. So it's not if you go and do the install npm install React, I think you get like 16 or 17.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. So I've manually had to say, I want to use this release candidate. Now, I can do that for multiple libraries, and I can expose them as isolated libraries. So I can have multiple versions exposed at the same way. I'm just doing this one now as a test. But then all I'm doing is the same thing that I did with React, the React controller to expose the app controller, is I'm just exposing the libraries under my remote libs.js file, the file that it will be compiled to. I'm exposing React from React library and React DOM from React DOM library. So it's actually pulling the node modules libraries and exposing them when it minifies. The same way that we do when we build our application and it minifies all of the libraries into our pack, basically our bundle or our bundle or our chunk if we chunked it out. It's doing the exact same thing, but it's exposing again that string for React so that we can call it remotely. So then if we go back to our router, now this makes sense. We've got our libs container with our remote URL pointing at the remote libs.js. And then if we have a look here, instead of calling, you can see I've commented it out. Instead of calling import React from React, now we're calling import React from libs/React. So now we're calling remote libraries. And if we go over here, we're actually using the lazy and the suspense from our remote React library. So before, when you think, okay, well, is it taking a long time to load? If I refresh that, actually it's not, because it's almost instant. So it's reading the synchronous React library in, and then it's doing an asynchronous query to load the other remote library in, and then it's displayed on the page. That's pretty it. I just thought it was pretty cool, and I wanted to show you a bit of a demo.
No, that's very nice. I understand that in 2 weeks' time you're going to do an episode on devs in the shed. So just because you could be watching it at any time, let me just double check what the date was for that. So
I think it was the 9th of March.
Yeah, I think the 9th of March in Australia, so the 8th for the most of the world. It's the 9th of March, 12 p.m. AEDT time. We're going to do a live stream. But to make that easier for everyone, we're going to spend a full hour looking at this. You can ask questions and all of that in real time. If you do subscribe to our channel, you will be able to get a notification as soon as we actually hit the go live button. You'll be able to join, and Aaron's going to take us through in a lot more detail this and probably some other things that you're you're going to build on top of, I'm guessing. So that's going to be in 2 weeks.
I'll make it a little bit more visually pleasing, so it's not just text written on a simple HTML page or a white screen. I'll add some functionality like button clicks, and I'll make it a bit more fluid and fun to look at and play with, so that you can see that there's actually stuff happening from the remote app, and also the querying in the remote libraries all happening under our monolithic app.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Aaron. That was awesome. We'll catch everyone hopefully in 2 weeks to join us live where we go into this further. Thanks, everyone. Bye.